First of all, I'm born and raised very proudly in New York City. And in this town, the sport is inescapable. We have more outdoor courts than any other location I'm aware of. And that's urban planning. New York City Parks and Recreation was very deliberate about creating opportunities for people to play outdoors as a means to give them an alternative to negative outlets. And that started in the 1920s and 1930s, very early in the history of basketball. Me being born and raised in the 60s and 70s, um, it was all around me. And in the first chapter of the book, uh, Bobbito's book of B-Ball Bong Bong, it's like I'm talking about my parents, I'm talking about my upbringing, and like it it's not even forced. It's just like it's there. It's I'm witnessing basketball as I'm 4 years old in the playgrounds, pick up, the arguing, the smack talking, the the reverence, the crowd. It's all the elements that make New York City basketball so special. My introduction as a 7 year old in 1973 to holding a basketball in my hand. But it really wasn't until 1980, 81, when I'm 14 years old, that I really get the fever where I can't imagine doing anything else but playing basketball. I can remember watching the Bad News Bears at the Lowe's Theater and having a basketball tournament shirt on because I wanted people, in every aisle and every row to know that I played ball. It was an identifier. It was how I defined myself, more so than even saying I was a New Yorker or that I was Puerto Rican or that I was Catholic at the time. It was like, I'm a ball player. That was like first and foremost. And it's still to this day, as I'm going to turn 60 in 2026, like that's the main way that I define myself and how I carve out my happiness and joy all these years later. And they were just as important in my ascension to eventually becoming a professional basketball player in Puerto Rico. And I detail all these moments that sort of like build this fever inside of me based on my travels, most importantly at my home court, the GOAT, but also going borough to borough looking for pickup. So in 2003, I authored my first book titled Where'd You Get Those? New York City Sneaker Culture 1960 1987, published independently by Testify. And it's still in print. We've gone through numerous editions. We had a 10th anniversary edition. We had a 20th anniversary edition. And the reason why I think it's had staying power is because it basically opened the curtain on a completely unknown era. Post the Jordan 1, most people know what happened. But my book focuses on an era before the industry became the multi-billion power that it is today, and it's still, still growing. Um, but sneakers were one component of many that were vital to a New York City ball player. And because of my age, being born in the 60s and raised in the 70s, it's like there was this cross section with hip hop as well. And so I, among others in my community of the same age, we yearned for sneakers that would be completely functional and perform well, particularly outdoors. But we also had the aspect of wanting to look fresh and wanting to look, dipped up and matching our tournament shirt. And so that required that we be creative because in the 70s and 80s, there weren't a lot of colors available. There weren't a lot of brands available. There weren't a lot of models that were out. And so by the mid 80s, post the Jordan 1s, it kind of explodes because there's a lot of money being made. And so the brands can spend more on research and development. They can release more. More brands are coming to the table with improved distribution. But prior to 87, it's kind of like, so, which was great because we were similar to how hip hop becomes this really special activity because of the lack of resources. Ball players being creative with their sneakers. I was customizing my shoes by like 80, 81 when I first started playing. Um, Painting them, painting the entire upper, painting just the stripe at times, so, we had a really peculiar approach that wasn't understood at the time, but wound up becoming like standard. Nowadays you have a number of customizers who are globally renowned for painting the people's sneakers, including NBA players and Major League Baseball players, you know. But that the beginnings of that are all in my first book, Where'd You Get Those? New York City Sneaker Culture, 1960, 1987. Confessions of a Sneaker Addict for the Source in 1990. Back then in publishing, we had to submit our pieces like 3 to 4 months before they actually hit the newsstand. So it was the April 1991 issue, but it actually hit the newsstands in March. Because then, again, a trick was they will put the date of the month, the following month, so that people, if it was still on newsstands in April, people didn't think they were buying something old. But to my knowledge, it was the first moment of sneaker journalism in media history. And so I am the progenitor until I'm proven wrong. Um, Certainly in U.S. Magazines, there's nothing even close. I give mention to me and Stretch's history in my memoir, Bobbito'S Book of Bebo Bong Bong, because I it's 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 part of my actual basketball thread. A teammate of mine in Harlem named Mark Pearson uh, became my buddy, and we would hang out not just while playing ball, we would just hang out. Period. He introduced me to Pete Knights and MC Search of the group Third Base, who at the time were unsigned. They wound up getting a contract with Def Jam, which was the biggest label in the world at that moment for hip hop. And then I started working at Def Jam a few years later, and that's how I meet a budding DJ named Skinny Bones, who changes his his nickname to Stretch by 1990, and he invites me to be on the radio. So if we trace it back, it's a basketball connection. Not that Stretch plays ball or he had anything to do with my basketball affinity, but I don't get that foot in the door unless I am a legitimate ball player and garner the respect of Mark Pearson, right? And so I talk about that in my memoir. And then me and Stretch got on the radio in 1990, and we're on air for 8 years together on WKCR FM, and we gave platform to a lot of unsigned up and coming artists, including Nas, Biggie, Wu Tang, Mobb Deep, Big Pun, Eminem, Jay Z, Big L. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, all these artists were either completely without a contract, teenagers, or with a contract, but like not on the radar of anybody, and sort of like up and coming. So it was a big deal. And I feel blessed to have that opportunity to contribute to hip hop culture in that way. I directed, produced, wrote, and music supervised a documentary titled Stretching Bobbito Radio That Changed Lives. It was released in 2015 on the 25th anniversary of our first broadcast. And Stretch was a co-producer, music supervisor. Um, and you know, it's still mind-boggling in a lot of ways that we had this opportunity to give voice to all these like unknown artists who wind up becoming like platinum sellers. And and when I was creating the description, uh, because it got picked up by Showtime and Netflix, and so I was doing like we didn't have like metrics in the '90s, right? Um, for the radio, and then I realized like the collectively the artists who came to our show had sold over 300 million copies of records. I was like, wow. Like we helped start their careers. Um, we didn't invent hip hop radio though. I mean, there's a whole decade of amazing personalities and DJs that came before us. We just happened to be part of the matrix, the ecosystem in the 90s that really helped elevate some of these artists to record sales that had been unprecedented just because hip hop as a culture was growing and becoming more globalized, and a lot more money was being fed into the marketing, into the sales, into the distribution, and all that. But I mean, there were people freestyling on the radio before we started our show. We just had 4 hours and we were commercial free. So that gave us like a little bit of an advantage on other stations, um, because we could let somebody rhyme for like 15, 20 minutes. Other stations couldn't do that. Um, they didn't have the time slot or that break into commercials or do a station ID at the top of the hour. We didn't. We were like the outlaws of radio in a lot of ways. So it was a special time. Got to travel to 47, 48 countries over 6 continents playing ball, whether it's pickup or I'm announcing a game or I'm currently running my full FC 21 tournament 1v5. It's in 30 international locations. I do it every summer since 2013. So I'm giving back. I'm giving back, and I'm doing all these like really unexpected give backs to the sport that gave me so much. And the memoir kind of explores all this also with a social justice angle because I started supporting a bunch of nonprofits that do sneaker donations and drives to help uh, support people in Africa and in Latin America, and I've been to these places that I had a court named after me in Zimbabwe, and so you know I'm kind of like reeling off all these moments, and it's kind of hard. Like the hardest thing to writing the memoir was writing the description. It was like, how do I fit 216 pages into like 200 words? I don't know, um, but I do know that it's the first memoir of its kind, um, because I'm Latino, because I'm raised on hip hop, and because I'm embedded in playground basketball. There's never been a book written from that perspective ever. And I hope it's not the last. But I'm extremely, extremely, extremely proud of what I was able to bring to the table. And people who've been reading it have been hitting me up like, yo, I hear your voice. Because I also spoke a little bit in Spanish, a little bit in Spanglish, and heavy like hip hop slang, super heavy b-ball slang, right? And anyone can figure it out. You could be a New York Times editor and not have ever played ball, but you can figure it out from the context. I was very deliberate about how I presented it. Any slang word, I built it around context so that people could understand what I was meaning. Um, but yeah, I fit a lot into those pages, and it features my 35 millimeter photography from the past 30 years. So it's also an art book. It's also a documentation of New York City playground basketball from the 60s, and then it's also my memoirs. It's like a triple threat.